for people, for jobs, for society. We all know that. So what they're saying is renegotiate it and have much closer alignment with Europe and the UK. It will be to everyone's advantage. Let's have, for example, alignment, harmonisation of European Union standards to British industry. I mean, it can't be difficult. We were aligned up until 30 days ago or so. So just go back to that. Secondly, review the the plethora of new quangos that are coming up to regulate all this, and don't duplicate. The old system was working fine, so try and go back to that as much as possible, both in Britain and in Europe. Let's get agreement on standards, investigation and monitoring, using the minimum of quangocracy. Let's rejoin bodies on a pragmatic basis that are beneficial to the UK and to Europe, things like Erasmus or Erasmus Plus. I mean, they're good things for our young people. They're good things intellectually. They get brainy people, travelling about Europe and studying abroad. They get Brits going off to Italy or Germany and working with top people, and vice versa. What's not to love? So instead of making a big issue, let's just realign to these things, and they cost hardly anything. There's no point reinventing the wheel. A Turing-type project is just a fantasy cooked up by Johnson. I mean, okay, do your thing, Turing, but also rejoin Erasmus and Erasmus Plus. And also, let's promote a democratic economy. One of the things Europe does well is that it's combining private entrepreneurship with socially regulated common ownership of important things like trains or natural resources and so on. So let's have this mix of private and public ownership, which is standard model in Europe. Let's have it back in Britain. I mean, the trouble with the Brexit lot is they're fanatical Ayn Rand, privatise everything, extreme, off the scale right-wing fanatic types. Well, why? Because they're working in the pay of the big corporations who paid for their whole Brexit story, as is coming out in the press every day. It's more revealed. We, the British people, the European British people, I'm speaking on behalf of them, we have to stand up to this. It's just, totally ridiculous. And finally, there was the idea of creating a forum to discuss common human security and foreign policy issues. I mean, of course, absolutely. And that should include intelligence sharing, the kind of thing I was talking about a few minutes ago. That sort of discourse, I mean, people like General Nugi should be in discussion with German, French, Italian colleagues on their response to the threats of global warming, which of course then have a huge impact on deterioration in Africa, knock-on effects on refugees, and the camps in Calais will flood to even greater degrees regularly, So it was, so this report that's come out I think is very important. I agree with it 100%. It should have been done yesterday. And congratulations to Luke Cooper for putting it together. And you can find it on the internet. It's readily available as a, download. I want to mention, of course, watching the UK unraveling as it's doing, in a welter of lies and disinformation. I mean, the level of political sleaze in the government, so-called government, of the Tory party, this rogue faction that have seized power of the once great Conservative Party by silencing people like Dominic Grieve, is shocking. But we're seeing more and more. We're seeing now Johnson fighting with Dominic Cummings. I mean, they're both scorpions. They're both criminals, in my opinion. They're both mendacious, power-hungry, reborn, oligarchical conspirators, probably. And they should have been stopped long ago. But unfortunately, because we don't have a written constitution, they were able to winkle in, like ghosts. They can come under the floorboards or through the doors, and they've seized the power at the heart of things. Okay, so this is shocking, but it's kind of good that it's coming out. I mean, of course Johnson won't resign. I mean, even if it was discovered he'd been raping young boys and burying them in the floorboards of Downing Street, he wouldn't resign. I mean, he'd still say, well, I didn't break the law. I mean, I suppose in that case he would actually. He'd go to prison, quite rightly. But what level, I mean, what he's already done is kind of up there in the resigning modality. How much further to the bodies in the floorboards at number 10 does it has to go before he realises that the brain cells kick in, the mirror neurons of ethics, that actually I've got to go, One wonders. I think he should have gone a long time ago. But the problem is, of course, they'll just appoint somebody else in his stead, and that person will be doing the same policies. I mean, the entire system, the entire Conservative Party leadership, root and branch, needs a complete overhaul. It's like it needs a moral heart transplant. And I've said, and I say again, the only thing that will shock this cadaver of the British failed state into ethical behaviour again is, its breakup when Scotland leaves, and other parts of the UK realise that the Westminster model is no longer serving them. I've proposed a constitutional reform package which might have kept the UK together. As a good Liberal Democrat voter for many years, and alternating with Labour or Green, as a progressive voter, I've always had affection for the UK, but I want it to be a progressive, godly and goodly place to live and in the world. It's become the complete opposite. It's become a sort of scorpionic nation. As Maharishi said, towards the end of his life, when he pulled his teachers out of the UK, he said, I can't work in the UK. They're not fit for, divine light instruction. They're a scorpionic nation. I still think that, the UK can be saved. But it's very important that those intellectuals and those thinkers and those educators and those moral philosophers, church people, speak out, as I'm doing. I want to notice, again, something in favour of Biden on the other side of the Atlantic. He is a moral leader. He's recognised for the first time in American history Armenian genocide by the Turks in World War I. I mean, why has it taken so long? I have Armenian friends who came here, they've shown me films. I know the history of the Armenian genocide. Of course it was a genocide, it was horrendous. They forced these columns of Armenians to march in the desert and then killed them and shot them to death. Why has it taken until 2021 to acknowledge that? I mean, the answer is Turkey is a powerful nation with, lots of monetary power and military power, and it's a member of NATO and blah, blah, blah. So that means we're silent about this? No, I don't think it does. I think it means that truth should be spoken to power. Otherwise, what's truth for? So finally, Biden has done that. And the French did that some time ago. I'd like to see the matter come up at the UN. I'd like to see the matter discussed rationally, and Turkey to apologise. It wouldn't take, when you've done something wrong as a nation, you need to say it. And I'd like to see Britain one day apologise for Brexit. It's caused endless hurt to our European neighbours, to European Brits, to Europeans in Britain. I mean, the whole thing was avoidable, unnecessary and traumatic. It needs an apology. Some other things that are interesting this last week is increased noises around both Scottish and Welsh independence movements. I lived in Wales. I'm according to Wikipedia, I'm a Welsh educator for many years. and I love Wales. My ancestral roots are partly in Wales. I lived and taught in Powys for many years, and that's where I trained as a religious studies teacher. The Welsh are finally waking up and realising that this is non-viable. This Westminster Johnson Tory sleaze acting as if they own everything is not acceptable to Wales. The independence movement has really ratcheted up in recent months, and now it's running at about 39% of the voting public would vote for independence, which is what it was saying in Scotland when the referendum happened, and during the referendum even more, voted. So Wales is going to go independent over this Brexit. I absolutely prophesy that. When my Druid friends in Wales finally realise what the horror show that's been performed in the name of Brexit, they will wake up. And Wales will be a proud independent member of the European Union, I hope. Likewise in Scotland, the independence movement is ratcheting up. Big elections coming up on the 5th of May. Now Scotland has set up as a campaigning group to move towards independence. I support Now Scotland. I'm a paid up member, and I've created an intellectual wing within it called Intellectuals for Free Scotland, because I honour and respect the Scottish tradition. I lived there for 7 years. I know it, deeply, and I love Scotland. It is an independent nation and deserves to be, but it's part of one Europe. But it should no longer have to suffer this imposition of, arrogance from Westminster and Windsor. They've let them down incredibly severely, and Johnson epitomises that ignorance with his cavalier attitude, his sort of racist remarks, anti-Scottish remarks over the years. I mean, the man has no right to rule, anything to do with Scotland. And so, good luck for the May the 5th election. I sincerely hope the SNP win a vast majority, and that signal goes absolutely loud and clear. They're leaving the Union, folks. They're going to have a second referendum. They will then have yet again the mandatory backing of the Scottish people for that. I think one of the tragedies of what we've seen is that intelligence agencies have now started infiltrating and interfering with democratic decision making, and we've seen attempts to smear Nicola Sturgeon. We've seen attempts to set Alex Salmond and Sturgeon at loggerheads. This to me is all a fake, predictable effort by rogue intelligence types who are gaming the system to create destabilisation. They may be from abroad, they may be rogue elements in the UK agencies. Who knows? But they don't have a shred of decency or integrity. That's the complete opposite to the kind of global thinking that the Belfer Centre was calling for on global warming. We should see, if and when, finally, thank God, inshallah, Scotland becomes a free nation, then there'll be time to have intelligence sharing across the border with the UK and the rest of Europe about serious threats like global warming, like peace, like development issues, ending poverty, food security, all these huge issues, and refugees and so on. Okay, and need I say the Irish meltdown that we watched, the violence. I mean, I've interviewed people in Belfast from the time of Troubles. I always knew it would come back with Brexit, and I've been saying that ever since I started my fasts. I'm watching it unfold. I'm sadly the Cassandra in this picture. I prophesied this from day one. It's now coming true. Troy is burning. I think there's a really important questions to ask about future intelligence, and politicians need to have a certain level of training in morality and intellect. These parties, Conservative and Labour, seem to have failed in their ability to discern appropriate leadership skills that are needed. I think Keir Starmer doesn't have the fire and the compassion and passion that Corbyn and others did. He's obviously got the intellect and the experience, but But we need someone with Corbyn's fire as well, and someone with a joined-up intelligence. We need John Smith back. He was the last really brilliant leader of the Labour Party, who may well have been murdered because of that reason. There's never been a proper inquiry into his death. And when I was organising meetings in Parliament, it was in the days of John Smith, who we all knew would win the next election, hands down. Suddenly he's killed off, you know. Well, that's not what intelligence agencies should do, whether that was a rogue intelligence agency within the UK or an external power, a sort of fanatical right-wing anti-socialist type of Netanyahu, death squad type thing. Who knows, you know. But they do operate, and there should still be an inquiry into what happened to poor John Smith, in my opinion. He's buried up on Iona. Okay, yesterday in London there was a big march against the pandemic, marching for freedom. And, about 10,000 people or more might have been there, probably some of my friends. I take the view that whilst it's wonderful to march for freedom and to stand up and show that you're not living in fear, I think that we should be very careful about joining the sort of anti-vax, anti-mask movement. My view of the matter, as I've said to people before, is that the key question to be asking, what the march should have been saying, is we want an investigation into the etiology of this pandemic, which has never been done. You know, this is the most huge travesty of human rights to know. Our greatest right is to know truth. We can't live without that. We will self-destruct without that. And yet no nation has referred this matter to the International Bioweapons Convention, which has an office in Geneva. You know, the placard should have read, "We demand truth. Where did this pandemic come from?" Let's not argue about whether this or that vaccine is the best solution. Let's not argue about whether masks are or aren't effective. Let's look at the science. The vaccines do seem to cause trouble. I mean, some people are injured by them. There's no denying that. But the masks do seem to be effective, and Biden has made clear the science is very much, they can help. The vaccines can help, it seems. It's just a question, personally, whether you want to risk the small chance of adverse reactions. But the fundamental question that we should be asking is, tell us the truth, find out the truth about where the origin of this pandemic lay. Was it in, and this is the million-dollar question, was it in bioweapons research by probably an international consortium, America and China, collaborating, funded by, this is how these things work. And if so, the consequences of that are stark. We, the people, need to clamp down on this kind of bioweapons terrorism research, that this could never happen again. This is why, as someone that worked in medicine and has taught courses on the history of medicine and philosophy of medicine, the first thing you do with a great epidemic or pandemic is you find its cause. And yet, we've swallowed a story that was promulgated by the Chinese Communist Party on very little evidence. The people that could have actually told the facts have been silenced or vanished. And so the world is in a sort of horror show of not knowing who let the ghosts in under the door. And as a philosopher, I've said this before, we have to be able to disprove something for it to be a scientific statement. Popper's the correct assertion when he set up the philosophy department at the LSE is that scientific statements have to be disprovable, otherwise they're not science, and therefore the assertion that this was all caused by pangolins and bats, and seafood markets, fine. Can we disprove that? Yes, we can disprove it by getting the UN to authorise, under the Bioweapons Convention, an exhaustive investigation of all the labs around the world capable of making this, including Israel, by the way. Because although it's not a signatory to the convention, it's one of the few nations that isn't. I think that as a goodwill gesture, Israel should open its doors too. We don't know which one of these labs might have made this thing and then leaked it, by accident or by design. We don't know. But we have the right to know. And that, to me, is what the Freedom March should have been asking for. The fact that they're not, that they're going on about masks and stuff, to me shows that their leaders have been brainwashed, and probably deliberately, by intelligence agents who are trying to steer that energy for truth in the wrong direction. I think this is what's happened with Sacha Stone's work, which for a while was quite promising. Give me the truth, let's have a truth commission. And yet, before you know it, he's talking to aliens and, totally gone off the plot. I mean, that's how it works. Truth tellers are made to look ridiculous because they're fed semi-truths that then are dressed up. And that's how intelligence operates. Now, that's dark intelligence. That's not the kind that I, was talking with at the Belfort conference. Those are genuine, high-level intelligence specialists who realise that truth is the only way to save, the people. And that's the first and primary duty of intelligence. The point was made, actually, that when intelligence reports are compiled, they're supposed to be agenda-free. They just report facts. Then the politicians decide on the basis of those facts. Why isn't this being done here? Who on earth is briefing in the higher echelons of global governance systems the facts around this? And why hasn't anyone had the intelligence to say, we should refer this to the Bioweapons Convention? The mind boggles at the stupidity of man, actually. As a philosopher, I long ago realised that wisdom, I call it the wisdom service, one of the other questions I asked on that seminar is, we ought to pay attention to ignorance, because it's fine having very clever people doing intelligence, but what do we do about seriously ignorant people that make their own coalitions and that come together for their own unconscious or nefarious purposes? The kind of people that marched on the Capitol, and believed all the QAnon nonsense. How do you prevent that kind of unintelligence festering and promulgating? Well, my strategy is as a teacher. I'm a philosopher. I teach. But it's not, we need a boost of our education system because, as I say, genuine teachers are now, in a sense, shackled. They're not allowed to teach effectively in the academic system. What do we need? Some more Socrates? Do we need some more martyrs? Well, so be it. Let's go for it. Let's have the confrontation between truth and power. I'm on the side of truth. But that brings responsibilities as intellectuals. I want to mention also the Middle East, which is the battleground. My friend that came here, you heard her speak, Isabel, has been helping in Palestine and Jordan and Lebanon. These people are in chaos and meltdown because of a fundamental wrong that's been done, the chaos, the unresolved tension between Israel and Palestine. Our world's intelligence community should be working together to solve these problems, should be creating common structures for sharing, trust building, peace building. That's why I set up the Truth and Reconciliation Commission for the Middle East. That's why I've done my commentary on the Quran and on the Jewish and Christian scriptures to try and provide a theological common ground for a theology of reconciliation. That's why I'm doing the Ramadan fasting. It's my sign of solidarity with my Muslim friends like Isabel's ancestors in Lebanon. There are millions of people doing Ramadan now. It's a very holy time, actually, in the calendar. It's based on the moon's cycles. Let's use this sacred time for deep reflection and inner probing towards truth. But what are we getting? Well, we're getting an attack on a tanker off the coast of Syria yesterday. It's thought by Israel throwing a drone rocket attack because it was an Iranian tanker bringing oil to Syria. Syria has to import energy supplies and Iran is willing to sell them to them. What does Israel do? You know, they're sailing in international waters. They have the freedom of the seas. They're not breaking any laws. But Israel thinks it has the right to attack a tanker, which has huge implications for the environment. Why does it do that? Because it has this pathological... No, because Netanyahu and his inner crony gang have this pathological hatred for Iran. For reasons that are... You have to be a psychologist, a pathologist to understand, because Iran is one of the nobler and more intelligent Islamic nations, it seems to me. They've been producing philosophers since, you know, for millennia, and they produced, before that, the great Zoroastrian tradition and intellectuals, you know, of world class. You can talk to the Iranians. I've been involved in several mediations to the Iranian embassy and consulate in London back in the day, and I found them highly cultured people, intellectuals par excellence. Bombing them, dropping bombs on oil they're trying to give to Syria is just, it's exacerbating the problems. It's not helping anything. It has ultimately a kick-on effect. It makes Israel look just stupid in the world's eyes. And I don't want that. As an old Zionist, I'm with Abraham and Elijah and Elisha and Isaiah and Jesus and Moses. You know, we want a happy Israel living in peace with its neighbours. That's old Zionism. Muhammad also wanted that. The Qibla started out facing Jerusalem. What we've got is a whole bunch of what I call new Zionists. Most of them don't seem to believe in God at all. They don't believe in ethics. Thou shalt not kill is not in their vocabulary. It's thou shalt kill whenever you possibly can. Thou shalt destabilise. Thou shalt terrorise in order to, you know, keep us in the ascendancy. That's not proper, what I call old Zionism. The idea of Zionism is you live in peace. You build God's holy mountain. That's why the religious Jews won't participate in the militarisation of Israel. Anyway, we're a long way from where we ought to be, and I just hope some Israeli and Egyptian and Syrian and Iranian intelligence agents were listening into the Balfour discussions and realise, hey, we've got to change our whole way of thinking. We've got to work with, across these boundaries, between Israel, Palestine, Iran, the Gulf, you know, etc., for common peace purposes and common environmental purposes. 3 died in that attack, by the way, you know. That's not how to build peace. And God knows how much oil is being spilled into the Mediterranean as we speak. What I want is what I call the Golden Gate solution. And those of you that are familiar with my work know I've proposed collectively we come together and reopen the Golden Gate in the eastern wall of the old city of Jerusalem, onto the Temple Mount. We build a peace tent there for the visitors, pilgrims from all over the planet who may be Jewish, Christian, Muslim, pagan, Sikh, Hindu, whatever, you know. All they have to do is sign a pledge of non-violence and peace to get in, and they can come and, you know, and join discussions with pilgrims from all over the planet. I've discussed this in Israel and Palestine with colleagues, and everyone says it's a good idea. So let's do this. And in my commentary on the Trump-Netanyahu peace proposal for Palestine-Israel, I said there are some things in this that are worth doing. And it would need huge amounts of editing work, but it could be moved in a direction that it could be the basis for a lasting peace settlement. And that includes the Interfaith Peace Treaty, which should be signed, which I wrote back in 2016, and it's got its website, Interfaith Peace Treaty, and people have signed it, but, you know, we need millions more. And that would be a pledge by all Muslims, Christians, Jews, Sikhs, Hindus, Buddhists, Druids, pagans, whatever. You know, we won't kill and demonise the other lot just because they're a different religion. We will use scholarship and study to reflect on our respective views of the absolute, recognising that no one has an absolute monopoly of the absolute. You know, the Shintoists have their way, the Taoists, the Zoroastrians. You know, everyone looks at the magic mountain from a different angle, to use Thomas Mann's image, and no one can block or, you know, should try block other people's views. Right, so I'm going to finish there. I think I've shared, I think it's been, a really interesting week. And I'm going to finish with a little poem. Oh, there's one thing I want to share. I think this is really interesting. Talking about philosophy in the Middle East. So I've discovered a brilliant intellectual for my commentary on the Quran. I'm always on the lookout for great thinkers to quote and include in the commentary. I'm aware that I'm stepping on the shoulders of giants in even attempting this commentary. And this is just another reminder of that, because I've discovered a man called Ibn Kamal, who was the Sheikh al-Islam of the Ottoman Empire. Lived from 1468 to 1534. He wrote 200 works in Turkish, Persian and Arabic. He wrote commentaries on the Quran, treatises on Hadith, Islamic law, philosophy and theology, Kalam, logic, Sufism, ethics, history, books on language and literature, and even poetry. He wrote a history of the Ottoman Empire, and he was appointed by the Ottoman Sultan as the Sheikh al-Islam, which meant he was the greatest, most revered scholar of the entire Ottoman Empire at the time, in the 1500s. He was also a Sufi, very much in love with Ibn Arabi's teachings. He knew Ibn Arabi deeply, and he proclaimed that no, Ibn Arabi is orthodox. He's getting the kernel of what Islam is about. He defended Ibn Arabi as the Sheikh al-Akbar, the greatest of all sheikhs. And he said of those criticising Ibn Arabi that, they've lost the plot. Now, among his many works, and you can look it up, he wrote many works in ontology, and his study of the nature of being is a prefigurement of the great Shia philosopher Mullah Sadra. And I've gone into all that in depth as a philosopher in my book on Being and Knowledge, which I published the first 2 volumes of. But I want to talk about another work he did, which is a treatise on the exposition of the intellect. Risala fi bayan al-aql. Now, aql is the Arabic word for intellect. And this guy wrote a whole treatise on what is intellect. And he looked at a summary of the views of all different philosophers about the intellect and what its types are. Gosh, I want that book. Has it been translated into English? I mean, that's the sort of philosopher's philosopher that we at the World Intellectual Forum are trying to work with. We want to find people like him. Where is he now? Is he an incarnation? Please send me his email. People that have done that deep work. I mean, when I was in the Vatican Library, I discovered Abelard written a book called On Intellecting, because he knew intellect is a verb. It's not just a thing, intellect. I don't know if Ibn Kamal, I don't know if it works in Arabic. Is aql also a verb? I don't know. It ought to be, because to think deeply, to intellect, is what we need to do to solve these manifold problems that the world is facing. And to make a peace intelligence service actually properly established. Well, we can do that as intellectuals first. That's what the World Intellectual Forum is. It's laying down the matrix for a peace intelligence service on the planet. So we may be Turkish, Indian, Pakistani, Hindu, Buddhist, Greek, French, whatever. We're common human beings, and we have access to intellect. We should use our gifts and skills to share in love what little bit of divine knowledge has been vouchsafed to us, or scientific knowledge, or intellectual knowledge. So anyway, I'm absolutely in awe of this man, Ibn Kamal, and if you can find out for me if that book, the Risala fi Bayan al-Aql, is in English, please, send me a copy.